I want to give you a short tutorial on how to do this project, task 1, where you are going to take an inanimate object, shoot it from multiple perspectives, multiple shots, and put it together as a simple video less than 1 minute in length in Adobe Premiere. To begin with, I put a link on the Google Classroom for this page right here, where it's help@adobe.com, where they have plenty of tutorials for everything Adobe. But the Premiere Pro, I think, are very good. Most of these are less than 4 minutes long, and they're covering all the areas that you need to know, including creating projects, looking at the interface, importing media, building sequences, etc. So do take a minute and do 4, 5, 6 of those tutorials. They're pretty quick and pretty self-explanatory. All right, so let's get on here. We're going to go over to Premiere. This is the start screen. You're going to start by making a new project, and we're going to call this task 1. Just like that. Oh, already screwed up, didn't I? All right, leave all these settings as they are. If this one says DV, change it to HDV, because you are going to be shooting from now on probably forever, unless you're working with older media in high definition. So we're not going to worry about scratch disks or ingest settings right now. What you do need to do is browse to the file that you should have made for your task 1. This one I have Bentley footage, so I'm just going to go ahead and put it in there, and I'm going to choose that, so that way I can put my Adobe Premiere files right in with my original footage. Make it easier to find later, easier for you guys to back up to the server. All right, so what you see here is the interface. There's nothing going on here. You see the blue box around it? That shows you where your what is selected. If you click these individual panels, you can see that they get selected with that blue box. You can move these panels around, even though there's nothing in here right now. This is your program where you're going to see the video program that you're creating. This is your timeline where you're going to see the actual sequences that you're building. So sometimes that helps to have this bigger. When you're importing your footage, you're going to take a look at your project window, which is here, and your media browser, and then this is your source window where you can pre-edit your footage or get a good idea of what it looks like before you put it in your timeline. So far, so good. But you can see that I move these around quite a bit. So I'm going to go up to this editing tab at the top of your panel here, and I'm going to click reset to save layout, and that way you'll get it back to square one. All right, so far so good. We're going to go to media browser. I want you guys to take a look at this. This is really handy once you get things set up, because it links to exactly where all your footage is. I'm going to click on my hard drive. I'm going to go to users. I'm going to pick Williams because that's who I am. Go into the desktop, and in desktop we have this Bentley footage. So what I want to do is I'm going to shift click and select all that footage. You can preview this. If you click with the thumbnail view, you can take a look and see what these items look like. And a really cool feature of Adobe Premiere is if you hit the tilde or grave key, which is next to your 1 key in the upper left-hand corner of your keyboard, if you hit that grave key, it explodes that up real big so you can see what's going on. You can, make these previews bigger or smaller. Also, if we're in list mode, it gives you more information. So I'm going to hit that grave key again, and we're just going to select all the footage that I took the other night. I'm going to hold shift. Then I'm going to right click on any of them, and I'm going to say import. All right, so now you can see I'm back in my project tab. Anytime you're on a tab, you can see these little contextual menus that you can go and do different things. Right now, we're not going to get too much into it. All I can tell you is if you double click this, it's going to open up in your source monitor. All right, so what we can do here is we can pre-edit this. You can click anywhere through here to see where you're at in your clip. You can also scrub, which is dragging the pointer here to the point in time that you want. And what we're going to do is we're going to pre-edit this a little bit. So I want this to end right here where he's looking right at me. I can click the output point right here, mark out, or I can hit just the O key, and that's where that can end. That's showing me that this clip is 7 seconds long. Remember I told you guys to have your clips be 2 to 5 seconds. Well, for an inanimate object, that's fine to have a chair just sit there for 2 seconds because it's still going to look like a chair. When you're looking at people or animals, it might take a little longer to get just the shot that you want. So this is right here. So this is like that pan up. Maybe I'll start it there. I'll mark it in or I. Again, you don't have to do Command I or Command O. Just hit the I or O key. It will set that in there. All right. Now I'm going to make a new sequence. So I'm going to go File, New, Sequence. And you can just drag your footage in and it'll try to match it up as best it can. I prefer to actually create your sequence based on your knowledge. So this is a digital SLR. We're shooting at 1080p and at 30 frames per second. So this gives you the description of this. This says most DSL formats like the Canon EOS Full HD. This is perfect for us. It's 1920 by 1080 pixels and has the right frame rate. Even though this says 29.97 frames per second, we just call it 30 frames per second. So we'll call this task 1. For my sequence name, click OK. Now we have a sequence. I can either drag from my preview window down into my sequence, or I can hit the delete key, or I could go back up and actually select the name of this, which says it ends in 59, so it's like this one, and drag that in there and get the same type of effect. Now here's an important thing about these links. These are not the video files that you see in your project. So what you can do here is if you select the name, we can call this pan up, because that's more of what this is, right? And if I right click on this, I'm going to look down here, I'm going to say reveal in Finder. You'll notice that this, even though I renamed it inside of Premiere, it never touched the original file. This is called non-destructive nonlinear editing. What that means is that you're not messing up your original footage at all. You're making all your changes just to a link to the original file. So you're adding effects, which this effect is just shortening this. And you notice that when I renamed it here, again, this is just an instance of the link of this file, but I'm not messing the file. That's an important concept to understand. All right, so we have this pan up, and I'm going to click on the bottom of my timeline and zoom up on this area. So the shorter span of time, the more zoomed up you are. I can scrub through this like this. You can see where I ended up. You can hit the play button here to play and stop. You can hit the space bar to play and stop. And you can also use the J, K, and L keys. The L key plays, K stops, J goes backwards. So you guys can play around with that a little bit. So J, K, and L. You'll notice that the J, K, and L keys are right under the I and O key. The reason for that is you use those 5 keys quite a bit once you start to get into editing. All right, so now that we have one piece of footage, I'm just going to randomly drop in things. You guys are going to take your time with this. And I'm just going to put these together. Notice that there's a snap on here so that these pieces of footage stay together. And again, if I played this or scrubbed through this, you can see that they're just kind of stuck together like that. All right. So you guys have to keep this under a minute. What I would like you guys to do is play with a couple of things. One of the things you can do is you can add a title. There is a legacy title that you can do if I go to File, New, which basically makes the title inside of Premiere. But a Photoshop file is a better way of doing it, or a more interesting way, because you guys know Photoshop pretty good. So you're not stuck with just the type effects that are inside of Premiere. So I'm going to click Photoshop file. This says we're going to make a Photoshop file, and it automatically gives it the correct video settings. So I'm going to say OK. And I'm going to call this title 1. And there you go. Now, when you're doing text on to a graphic that has a lot of tone to it, usually you use white color. So you might want to fill this bottom here. We'll just say we're going to fill this with a tone. So I'm going to go Edit Fill. And we're just going to put a 50% gray in here. You could select black if you'd like. I'm just going to put gray. I'm going to create another layer. And I'm just going to write his name. So we got Bentley. Again, if you wanted to do something really tricky, you could do these introductions in an animation program such as Adobe Animate or Adobe After Effects. This is just going to be a still image that I'm putting in here. All right. So now this is a layered Photoshop file. The reason I did this is there's some cool effects that you can do with this. If you choose to use some layers and do more fancy type stuff. For right now, what we're going to do is we're just going to keep it like this. I'm going to go File, Save. And by default, this saves in the same folder that your project is in. So now I can go back to my media browser, and I can take a look in this project folder, and I can see that Title 1 is there. I'm going to right-click on it, say Import, and you can see that we have some things here we can do. We can merge all the layers, which would give it that gray background. We don't want to do that. So I'm going to say Individual Layers. I'm not even going to select that bottom layer. I'm going to say OK. So now I have this layer, Title 1. If we take a look at this in the preview, you can see there it is. No, this is the one we want. I kind of screwed up there. This is something I did earlier. Let's delete that. So this I can take and throw on to here, my title. All right, so I'm going to show you a couple real quick effects. One of the effects, I'm going to click here to the right so you can see my effects panel. I'm going to go to Transitions, and the dissolve, the cross dissolve is something I use a lot. What it does is it takes the previous frame and the frame after it, if you have it on both sides, and blends it. Now in this case, we don't have anything before it or after it. So if I hit play, you can see it fades in. You can see there's the title there, and then it fades out. You can change the length of this by using the arrow tool to make it go longer or shorter as you please. Let's talk about one more thing. I'm going to go back to my media browser, and I'm going to take a look in here in my desktop in Bentley footage, and I think I have some music. So I'm going to take the Peanut Blender, and I'm going to import that. And I'm going to just drag it on my A2, which is my audio file. You can see that this is a much longer song than my video is. So I'm just going to trim it back to this. Let's zoom back up on it. And I'm going to want that to fade out. So I'm going to go back to my effects panel. Notice I'm clicking on this right area. I could open this up and you can see where effects is at. And I'm going to go to Audio Transitions, and I'm do a constant power crossfade on this guy. I'm going to go all the way to the end. Well, wait a minute. Can't see where it's at. There we are. Constant power back on the end there. So that way when we play this, it fades out. And again, I can bring that there. I could click on my fade itself and change how long it fades. There's a lot of things you can do here. So, all right, that's basically it. You don't necessarily have to have music on here if you don't want. I just think it adds a little bit. All right, so the next step is to save it and upload it. So I'm going to go to Export Media and give it a second here. This is inside of Adobe Premiere. We might use Media Encoder in the future, but for this one, it's going to be fairly short. It's automatically making it at H.264 based on what our sequence settings were. I'm going to change this output name to task. Let's see. We want your name, so Williams, and then task 1, and then we also want the date, so this is 5/22/18. So that would be a really good file name for you, except for the Williams part. And I'm just going to put it in here. It says it's going to make it an MP4. I'm going to keep this all the defaults, and I'm just going to export it. Since this is a fairly short file, the export shouldn't take too long. If you are working on a project and you need to export something, if you hit Q, it opens up Media Encoder. That way you can render it while you're working on something else instead of sitting there staring at it and waiting for it to render. Once you get your MP4 done, all you have to do is upload it to Google Classroom and you're done. All right? Thanks for watching. Bye.